Hi, welcome to Stray Painting. I'm your host Zach, and on today's episode, we're going to cover the work of Alexander Young Jackson.
A.Y. Jackson was one of the founding members of the Group of Seven, and you can learn more about him and his work at the Group of Seven website, the McMichael Canadian Art Collection website, and in this National Film Board of Canada video on Canadian landscape painting. I'll include links in the description box below if you wish to learn more. A.Y. Jackson was born in Montreal, Quebec in 1882. He started his art career at the age of 12, beginning work at a Montreal printmaking firm to support his family. He went on to study in Chicago and France and returned to Canada in 1912. In 1913, he held a solo art exhibit at the Montreal Art Gallery, and afterward, he was contacted by J.E.H. MacDonald, asking if his painting The Edge of the Maplewood was still for sale, because Lorne Harris was interested in buying it. This correspondence sparked a connection that led him to becoming part of the Group of Seven. He moved to Toronto in late 1913, and in 1914 moved into the studio building along with other members of the group. Jackson would stay working in the building until 1955, when he was the last member of the group to leave. The Edge of the Maplewood is an early attempt to portray Canadian landscape using an impressionist style, and Jackson painted it during the spring maple syrup harvest in Sweetsburg, Quebec. We can see in it the use of the short brush strokes and the attempt to capture lighting over specific details that Impressionism strove for. Personally, I see all the elements that I think of when I see a Jackson piece. I think of his work as being in the shoulder seasons, spring and fall, when the air is still crisp and cool, and his desaturated color palette, using lots of neutrals and cooler yellows and greens, helps to reinforce the feeling of being in this cool field in early spring, ready to tap some maples. Jackson painted all over Canada, and one of his favorite places to paint was in and around Georgian Bay. During my research, I learned that Georgian Bay has many names in different dialects, among them Minnedoogumi, which means Great Lake of the Spirit, and Wasaagumi Weequed, which means Shining Waters Bay, both in Anishinaabemowin. In Georgian Bay, November, we find Jackson using his desaturated palette and this mustardy yellow-orange to highlight the stratifications of the rocks, which are part of the Canadian Shield. It gives you a chill as you see the trees are bowed under this wind sweeping in off the bay, and these ones here live on a few of the over 30,000 islands that can be found in the area. Keeping with our theme of cold weather, we have March storm Georgian Bay, driving that chill deep into our bones, with the threatening cloud structure floating in toward us over the line of trees that could provide shelter, off in the distance. The moodiness of the grays and the way they reach toward the ground show the turmoil in the sky above us, and the cold darkness of the icy water keeps us firmly on land, not wanting to venture forth. This feeling gives way in Terre Sauvage, which was also painted in Georgian Bay, and this time we find a break in the clouds and some hints of brighter colors. The tree's vertical lines draw our eye up into the open space in the sky, and the curl of the clouds leads us to the left-hand side of the picture, where we find a hint of rainbow. The storms have gone, and we have now found the beauty in what otherwise might have seemed a desolate place. The piece that I've selected to paint for this episode is a return to the cool storminess of fall. Algoma November was painted on a boxcar trip to Algoma, which is on Lake Superior, Anishinaabe Gitchagumi in Anishinaabemowin. Now, Algoma is a compound word created by American Henry Rowe Schoolcraft, who is infamous for creating faux indigenous place names. He used the Al from Algonquin as the prefix, and Goma from the Algonquian for lake as the suffix, and he wrote about all of this in his memoirs after serving as the U.S. Indian agent in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, which is across the river from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, where Algoma is. I want to pause for a moment here and talk about why I include Indigenous place names for the artwork that I'm covering. We, as non-Indigenous peoples living in the Americas, are a part of colonialism. We have and continue to benefit from the dispossession, subjugation, and the continuing attempts to erase Indigenous peoples. In what we currently call Canada, a name that was taken from Indigenous peoples by a Frenchman who mistook the word for village as the name for a country, these acts have amounted to genocide using tools like the Indian Act, the reserve system, the residential school system, and a pervasive systematic racism which continues to create generational trauma, economic disadvantages, and lower quality of life for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in Canada today. The government, on our behalf, has worked to separate Indigenous peoples from their lands that had names which described the landscape, a species from the area, or a cultural event that occurred at that location. Those names were replaced with European names on maps that put imaginary lines on real land for the purpose of claiming possession of it. Bernard Nietzschman, a geographer, wrote, "More Indigenous territory has been claimed by maps than by guns." This assertion has its corollary. More Indigenous territory can be defended and reclaimed by maps than by guns. It's in that spirit that I seek to learn more about the names that were given to this land before it became what it is currently called, to deepen my understanding of the people and the land that we call home. This practice can be seen in Canada today with the movement to reclaim Indigenous place names. There are many examples of this, including the Nisga'a Final Agreement that changed 34 place names to their Nisga'a language names, the Squamish Atlas, which allows users to learn more about the original place names for landmarks and oral histories of locations in BC, and on Native Land, an online database that is attempting to map Indigenous territories, treaties, and languages around the world. I'm aware that learning place names alone does not itself end colonialism, but it does help to understand the history of the land, the peoples who live here, provides the opportunity to start connecting with communities on an individual level, and broadens one's view of the land offered in these landscape paintings. If you are interested in learning more about these projects, or if you'd like to learn which nation's traditional territory you are currently living on, I'll leave links in the description box below for you to do your own learning as well. Coming back to Algoma November by A.Y. Jackson, we can see all the elements of his style on display in this piece. We have the cool crispness of fall being shown to us in the desaturated colors, as well as the foreboding storm clouds in the distance. We also have another element here in the water, in a return to the short strokes of Impressionism, though these daubs of color verge on pointillism to me. So in painting this piece, I will want to focus on two things: making neutral, desaturated hues, and maintaining the use of those impressionist dots on the water. And how did we do?
All right, we've got our final card here, so let's do our standard review before we sleeve it up. First off, we wanted to make sure that we met both of our focal points of the project, and I think we have. Those focal points were, we wanted to make sure that we had neutral and desaturated hues to maintain that sense of coldness from his original piece, as well as we wanted to maintain the use of lines in the cloud area and the impressionist dots at the bottom portion in the water. And I think we've achieved both of those things. I will say that the dots at the bottom, I think, are a bit of the weak piece about the weak part of this piece. However, they do maintain the look of his original. So I'm overall happy with it. But I think if I was to do this again, instead of using these short side strokes, I would actually just dot the brush onto the canvas and hope that that presented a much cleaner sort of dot. The other two things that I want to mention about this are that this card looks slightly different from the others in the series so far, and that's that I've used a standard basic island as opposed to the full art basic islands that I have been using. And the reason for that is that I found maintaining the pin line at the bottom was a huge pain in the butt, and I didn't want to be bothered with it anymore. I found that it really hindered my painting stroke at the bottom, as well as I would often erase a lot of the detail if I did paint into that text box when I later cleaned it up using my toothpick. So I decided going forward to just not use those cards, and instead I will be using a standard island and just maintaining that mana symbol in the center. I think it gives an overall cleaner look, and it just looks better and gives me more room to work in, which is great. The second thing you're going to notice is that I have pretty aggressively cropped Jackson's original piece, and that is simply because he's working on a square canvas, and I'm adapting his piece for a 2x3 vertical rectangle. So I've decided that going forward I will pretty aggressively crop images if it still maintains the sense of the original piece, and I think in this case it does. All right, I'm going to put some top coat on this card, but before I do, I'm going to leave you with our final takeaway as always, which is to remember that the effort you put in is more important than the perfection you achieve. And that's to say, the more you try, the better you'll get. You just have to try. I want to thank you as always for joining me. I had a lot of fun rediscovering the work of A.Y. Jackson, and I hope that you've learned something along the way as well. I'll see you again in 2 weeks' time, so until then, happy painting and peace.